Uh, Pranam, Jai Jinandra, everybody. Um, we'll just start with the Navkar mantra and then I'll introduce our speaker for today. Just say one Navkar mantra together. Namo Rihantanam, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ayaryanam, Namo Vajayanam, Namo Loye Savasahunam, Eso Panchana Mukkaro. Savvapavapanasano mangalanancha savesim padhamam havai mangalam khamemi savve jiva khamantu me miti me savabhuyesu veram ajam nakenai. May I forgive all souls. May all souls forgive me. My friendship is with all, and my enmity is with nobody. Pranam, Jai Jinendra, everybody. Um, we are really, really lucky today to have with us in the beginner Jainism class Mumukshu Rishibhai Zaveri, who in June, so he's third generation, born and brought up in the West. He studied, went to school in America, and even entry into the sphere deeper into Jainism was in the last sort of 12 years in the second half of his life. And he's got a very inspiring story. He came to the UK recently, about 6 weeks or so ago now, and he's going to become a Jain sadhu. He's going to take Diksha, take the five great vows, and become a monk um, in June. But he still is. He's been living, working in the US, and the title of today's talk that he's going to be giving is Jainism in the professional world um, and related to work, to careers. So I'm not going to spend too long talking. And we're really, really lucky to have him with us. So thank you so much, Mumukshu Rishibhai, for joining us. And I'm going to pass it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mukubai. Pranam, everyone. So as Mukubai mentioned, I will be taking Diksha in June 8th. I'll give a quick background, and I'm sure we'll have a question and answer session later on. So we can go deeper. But very quickly, as you mentioned, I grew up in the US. I moved to the US when I was 2.5. And so, my native language for the longest time was English. I went to the University of Michigan. I did my bachelor's and my master's in computer science. Um, I started and I worked at Salesforce, which is a technology company out here in the US. I think I mean in the UK as well. And so I worked for Salesforce as a software engineer, then a senior software engineer for about 6 years. I quit last year, or you can say honestly, you can say retired last year, to train and then get ready for Diksha. My journey when it comes to spirituality has been, really up and down. Growing up, we have a very big sangh or a very close-knit sangh in Michigan where I grew up. And so as a young kid, I was, going to Pachala or going to the temple every weekend, with my parents. But once I got to college, I really started to distance myself for a various number of reasons, obviously because of proximity. I was not there that I didn't have any, incentive to go. Um, Even as I kind of saw, I was living on my own, so I kind of got to make my own decisions. And then at that time, never saw any utility in the things that I had learned or what I was doing when I was younger. But then at the same time, I met my guru in India, just where I met a Sadhu Bhagwant in India, who then ended up becoming my guru. And he basically showed me a whole new, Jainism from a completely different perspective. And that really changed my relationship with my religion, with my spirituality. And then that was about 12 years ago, as Mukul mentioned. And then from there, I continually progressed, learning more and more, trying to put more things into practice. I was still living alone for about, 3, 4 years after, all this happened. And even living alone, working in a different city than where my parents are, and they're still trying to understand how I can apply my spirituality and my religion and how I can still have a decent professional life, and all those things. Those were constant things I was thinking about. Um, and then I moved back home during COVID. That's what gave me more opportunity to grow spiritually. Obviously, so since I have more time, I'm not worried about driving to work or any of those things because I was working from home. And as those things progressed, I got closer and closer to making that decision. But so as we mentioned today's talk, and I'll try to keep it pretty brief because I do want to open it up for questions, and I think that's how I also prefer, having closer, like deeper conversations. But I will, give a brief kind of talk on how we can merge Jainism and, our professional life. And really, more than Jainism, I would even call it the spirituality. Um, what can it do for us, when it comes to our professional life? Well, before that, I want to start with, a quick question. Um, what do you guys think, right, that when it comes to, career, which is involves like, making money, creating a life for yourself, is that something that Prabhupada Bhavir would have talked about, promoted, or is that something that maybe after he was gone, the other Acharya Bhagwans, the other knowledgeable scholars, is this something you think, how do you actually make money? How do you actually build a career? Is that something that you think would be a topic that, these scholars or these monks, people who are technically detached from the world, is that something you think they would talk about, they would really care about? So if anybody has any maybe answers or any opinions, we can quickly take a couple minutes. Anyone? You can write your answer in the chat as well. But do you think that, Bhagwan Mahavir would have spoken about how do you, you know, create a career? How do you build a career? How do you build a profession? Or do you think any of the acharyas in our past, even currently, would talk about those things? Does those do
Hey
those
Rishi.
match with? Yeah, hello.
Yeah, just it's General here. Just a quick one, I
Hi.
think, on my view. I think
Uh-huh.
they would have talked about building a career, but perhaps in a slightly different way to the way we look at careers today. Perhaps maybe Marvin Bhagwan would have gone about the way in which one would have done their career. So in terms of which professions, more aligned with Jainism in terms of our core values, or professions that sh one should avoid. For example, in any illicit or illegal activities, things like that. So that's probably one way they would have done it. I think the world's changed so much since Marvin Bhagwan was here. So whether that's been translated into a more modern sense is a question that you can probably answer as well here. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts.
That's very good. Yeah. So definitely that's true. And see, this is, and the fact that you thought about it in this way is very good because when I first kind of got introduced to this, I didn't think that they would have talked about it at all because my opinion at that time was, well, we talk about non-possessiveness, right? So, kind of limiting your resources and, basically making money, right, kind of goes against that. So how would, when it comes to religion, which talks about not having possessions and kind of reducing your wealth, then also talk about how to create wealth? Um, so does anybody, but you're right, they do talk about it. So then the question is why? Why would they even, like you said, why would they even talk about how, maybe they didn't necessarily talk about in general how to create wealth, but kind of what kind of professions to go to, what not to do. But why would they have even, given those opinions? Why would they have talked about why, creating wealth? Anyone else can answer as well?
Jai Jinendra, Rishi Bhai.
Jinendra?
It's Kavit Bhai here. Now, I think that the reason they have given us the options what professions are, is being in sansar, we have to be part of life, and for life to live in sansar, we need money, and therefore, they would have given us the guidelines to make sure that what we are doing is good karma, I guess.
Yeah. So let me ask the question, if you entertain me for 1 minute, right? If, let's say you were struggling to make money, right? You were struggling to basically put food on your table, to have a roof over your head. Would you be joining these classes?
But probably not, because I would be more concerned about, yeah.
Exactly, right? So even Prabhu, Acharya Bhagwans, our Guru Bhagwans, they all understand that to stay in sansar, right? Even if somebody wants to progress spiritually, they need to first have a solid base when it comes to their worldly life. And that solid base, right, include money. It doesn't include wealth. And so without that, no one will have the mental maybe space, right, or the time to actually go and explore, the spiritual world. There are some who can do it, but I mean, this has to be the general, case. And for the general case, right, that's not true. Because if we're worrying about, our job, if we're worrying about our money or our wealth or food or, other necessities, then our spirituality always is going to take, the second priority. And so because of that, um, Jainism has a very robust, set of knowledge, and they teach about what kind of professions to do, but also how can even spiritual teachings, things that we learn through spirituality, how they can actually also help us in our professional life. For example, and these are some stories that I like to tell, wherever I go. I had a really good friend. She was like a couple years younger than me. We went to Pachal together. When she interviewed for a full-time or for an internship position, when she was in college at that time, she was, if anyone has gone through those, you have those questions like, what would you do in some sort of situation? So the interviewer asked her that question, you have a agreement with one of your colleagues. How would you handle it? And it was such a simple answer technically, but she used the concept of anekantvad. And she said the word even, that in my culture, in my religion, we have this concept of anekantavad where we, are encouraged to see, the same situation from multiple viewpoints, including the viewpoint of those who don't agree with us. And so when she talked in that way, he was impressed at the time, the interviewer, nothing more than that. But then she gets her internship. She joins, with that hiring manager. And when she walks into his office, right above his head, in huge letters stuck on his cabinet, she sees the word Anekantavad. Right? He's not Jain, he's not even Indian, right? But he was so impressed, right, by this concept, because there are so many of these professional concepts, because even in professional life, they will talk about seeing things from different, multiple points of view. But never had he found really a single term, right? Vocabulary, even, because vocabulary also does make a big difference, right? The fact that we in different job things, we have different, different sets of vocabulary, because they have those words play a big role. And so having, just that word Anikantwad, we're so fortunate because it automatically, makes us think about seeing things from different views. So he was so impressed that there was such a word, that existed, which really, solidified that entire concept. Similarly, this is not in professional life, but this is, and I think it carries over in professional life. One of the students, a master student that we know in the US, he had to do a case study for business. It was more, I think it was somewhat of a supply. And so the case study that he's given is a shoemaker who makes leather shoes. Now, obviously, that includes the violence of, numerous, animals, of cows. And now his case study was, how do you make them more efficient? How can they sell more shoes? Meaning, how can they, in the long run, how would that increase the violence to cows as well? And so he was in this dilemma. If he does the project and he does it well, even though it's just a case study, it may not be a real thing, it's still, goes, against his morals. Or he doesn't do the project and he can potentially fails the class. And so he thinks about it for a few days and then he comes up with an idea. And instead of actually talking about how this company can improve their sales, by whatever supply chain, changes, he instead actually writes an entire negative case study of how their current model for selling shoes or selling leather shoes is totally wrong. He talks about it from a moral standpoint, even from the standpoint of the fact that, there is a large now population of people moving away from, real leather towards vegan leather. And so he, instead of telling them how they can improve these sales of leather shoes, he basically writes a case study about how they should switch to a completely vegan model. Which was, and so he's still very worried. He basically expected to get a 0 in that project because he didn't go, it was completely against what the guidelines of the project were. And yet, when the professor's time to give the grades back, the professor stands up in front of the class, tells him that he got, full marks, 100 out of 100 in the project, reads his paper to the entire class, and also tells them, right, that he's never in his life teaching this class has anyone ever given this sort of report, completely right, standing true to their own morals, but still, doing, the project to the best of their ability. And so the professor himself was so impressed that he even, took this student on, for research as well. And so one thing that many of these things, what I learned from when I hear these stories, and I try to use it in my own life, is that many times we are afraid to talk about our morals, our principles when it comes to the professional world, because we feel that they're maybe against the norm, or they're not really we don't necessarily see the usefulness in them, or we think that they might hold us back. But in my own life, in the life, of my friends and other people that I know, we've seen the opposite. That if we stand, if we're firm in our beliefs, if we're vocal about our principles, instead of it alienating us, it actually makes us stand out. I think being alienated and standing out are two different things, because alienation always, makes us seem as lesser than others. Whereas these concepts or these philosophies that we hold on to really have the power of making us, shine, to actually put ourselves in front of others as someone, who's principled, someone who, is worth putting, to invest in when it comes to managers and directors, when they see how strong you are. Another example in my own life, for those who have heard about Upadhan. So Upadhan is like a 47-day, thing where you go and you stay with sadhu bhagwans, where you kind of stay as a sadhu for 47 days. So I really wanted to do that. I was working at the time. It was actually the holiday season for Salesforce, where I work, is really heavy, and so it's a really busy time. But that's the same time that also the Updan was happening, and so I wanted to take 47, so basically 2 months off, go and do this Updan. So I was scared. I had no idea, how can I ask my manager for 2 months off? Because it's not just my manager who gets, pressured. My teammates will be under pressure as well, because obviously, out of a 5-person, 6-person engineer team, if one person goes, that's a lot of pressure on people's heads. But I kind of had some courage. Me and another friend, Nishidbhai, I don't know if he's on the call here today, but we basically came up with a presentation on how, me doing Upadan would actually benefit the company, how it would benefit the team. And so on Monday, I do a meeting with my manager, and I asked him, hey, this is what I want. I want 60 days off, which initially he's shocked. He has no idea what Updan is. He doesn't even know what Jainism is. is, other than, the fact that I was Jain. And so initially he's shocked, and so I tell him, don't worry, I have a presentation, maybe it'll change your mind. But then immediately he says, Rishi, don't worry about it. I'll give you 60 days off. I'll also give them to you paid. I think most employees, right, to even imagine 60 days off is pretty wild. And to also have those 60 days off paid, is really, it seems almost impossible. But that, he couldn't give me 2 months off paid because of other company policies, but he gave me 1 month paid off of the two. And when I come back again, so my manager is okay with it, even my teammates, right, for whom it, adds extra pressure, they were also, very fine with it. No one had a problem. And they were all happy that I got to do what I did. But I come back and I talk to my manager and I ask him, like, I'm so grateful that you let me do this, but why? Why did you, right? I didn't have to show you, I didn't have to convince you really that much to let me go. So then I said, what was the thing that did convince you? And so what he told me at the time is that, Rishi, I know you, I know who you are. I know that anything you do, right, is always going to be beneficial to you and for those around you, including, your professional, your colleagues. And so he said, so I had no doubt that even those 60 days, though it would, be heavy for the team, it would be in the long run beneficial to the team. I had no reason, to be convinced because I've seen that already. And so that for me really touched me, that even my character, or many times, in professional life, we kind of think that character doesn't really matter that much, right? As long as you're good at what you do, that's enough. But, from my manager, I came to the realization that no, character does matter because it informs how others view you, it informs how other people interact with you, how much trust they put in you. And so instead of being a detriment to my career progress, my spirituality, or my how strong I was, because this is, throughout my time, there were many times where we would go out for team dinners, but I wouldn't eat, or other things. I had from the get-go, I had already told my manager that, as much as I love my team, as much, as I, like programming, and what Salesforce stands for, my career, sorry, my religion, my spirituality comes first. And I will always put that first. And so many times we think that might hold us back, but in fact, in my life, I've seen that it actually, helped me speed forward. And I'm not the only one. Rishibhai, again, who I talked about, even in his own professional progress, he was a manager in cybersecurity, and he had the dream that 15 to 20 years from now, I want to be the chief information security officer. And so he had this dream, and he was slowly working towards it, but he had really no idea what he should do. But he also is a really big follower of Acharya Ratna Sundar Maharaj Sahib, if anybody has heard his name. And so he would listen to a lot of his lectures, his pravachans. He would read a lot of his books, and many of the many sentences, or like short phrases that Gurudev would give, he would try to imply them, not just in his personal life, but in his professional life. And he can tell you, what changes happened when what he applied and how that affected his professional life. But the dream that he had for 15, 20 years down the line of becoming a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer, he achieved it in 4 years. Right? He started this journey, and within 4 years, he achieved, something that he was hoping to achieve in 15. And he can tell you, step by step, if you ever get a chance to talk to him, he can tell you literally step by step what changes he made in his own, how he dealt with his employees, how he dealt with managers, how he dealt with conflict, based on the teachings of our scriptures, based on the teachings of Prabhu, based on the teachings of Gurudev. So what I want, the whole kind of gist of all of this when it comes to spirituality and professionalism is, I don't think the two things are different. I think even in your workplace, you can practice spirituality, because spirituality, at its core is how do you interact with those around you? How do you react to the situations that you face? Um, and how do you change yourself in relation to those situations and people around you? And so even in your professional life, if you work on it, your spirituality can actually help you progress very quickly, um, whichever field. Similarly, even when it comes to choosing your career, choosing your field, I think each of us have a different relationship with our career. Many of us choose our careers for different reasons. I chose, computer science because I was good at it. There was no other maybe reason. People who become doctors, um, they would, they choose it because of a more of a sense of helping. So part of their nature, right, informs their career. They're very helpful. They want to save people. They want to they want people to live better lives. And so they choose their career along that path. People choose it based on, certain principles that they have. For example, I have a couple of friends who got laid off. They were in the tech world in the US. They got laid off in the last couple of years. And instead of, just finding any whatever job they could, they took that time to really think about, I want the work that I do, even if it's in tech, to be, impactful and to, help actually improve the world, make the world a better place. And so they deliberately only, applied to companies that were in the environmental field, and or on helping the environment, or helping um, access to to healthcare to underserved communities and things like that. They went out of their way and took that extra hit. Obviously takes time if you want to really only apply in certain uh industry, but they took that time and they took that hit, but to find a job that really spoke to them, at a spiritual level, at a level of what they really, what their purpose was in life. So each of us has a different, reason. The reason I worked at Salesforce as opposed to other tech companies was that I preferred having a balanced lifestyle compared to Google or Facebook. Salesforce as a tech company is so fast paced. There's not so much pressure, there's not so much competition between, employees. And so I like that because it gave me then time for the rest of my day to practice spirituality. So some people practice, their spirituality um within the workplace in that way, by choosing their career. Some people use a career as just, something to make that money, to have that stable life so that they can really connect to spirituality outside of the workplace. So everyone has it's different for every single person. But at the end of the day, and this is a phrase that I like, many people might have already heard it, but I use this almost every day. But basically, as long as no matter what we're doing, if day to day we are increasing our virtues, right? Our virtues being, those qualities that really bring happiness. So the virtue of equanimity, the samta, or the virtue of maiti, which is friendship with all living beings. Um, the the virtue of dhirta, of stability, of patience. So if we're able to increase those virtues in any sort of way, day to day, then we will see the effects in our professional life, in our family life, in our social life, in our academic life, if there are any students here. And so really that is the goal of spirituality. And then you can apply that in anything that you do, in any situation that you're in, including your professional life. With that, I will kind of take a pause. We can, if anyone has any questions, or any comments, we can go from there about this topic, and then we can go maybe general. Is that okay, Mukul?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And just to show that I really am passionate about this topic, is I've also worn my Salesforce sweater, since I had to represent. So somebody directly messaged me about my favorite football team or sport. I will get to that. We'll stick to the spirit, professionalism and spirituality first, and then maybe we can go into those things. Also, somebody would have to explain to me if football, refer to soccer or American football. I also don't know.
Yeah, I guess the question I have, Rishi, is so I'm 24 myself, so I'm someone who's quite young, quite interested in Jainism and spirituality, and I've just started my career path as well. So I guess my question to you is, as someone else who's also pretty young but also found Jainism so ingrained in their life, what sort of tips would you give to people in their 20s or even younger to who are looking to try and include spirituality in their day-to-day life in a practical way that's not ritualistic or that's not based on, if you do this, then that's what you need to do. Sort of a day-to-day practical way of doing it in a modern life. I mean, you grew up in the US, in a Western society, but you still managed to find Jainism. And I think the problem going forward is that a lot of young people won't find Jainism because they grow up in an environment where Jainism isn't really the most popular topic, or why would you spend time on Jainism, right? There's so many other cool things you could do. So yeah, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so like, when I was your age, really, I just like you said, right? For me, at that time, Jainism really, like, this the rituals didn't really speak to me. Um, it took time for me to kind of get to that point, but really what did speak to me was this fact that, especially when we're younger, um, things around us are like just changing constantly because, we're still trying to grow professionally. Our, friend groups and kind of our social life is always in flux, is always in motion. Um, when it comes to our personal life or when it comes to significant others and things like that, things are just, always, there's a lot of chaos is what I found in my life. And I'm sure most young people kind of find that, similar chaos. And so where Jainism really helped me was to actually understand how do you deal with that chaos? How do you, kind of, find that straight path, through all the chaos, um, that, so that you're not, negatively affected by the things that are happening around you. So when it comes to, conflict between friends or when it comes to conflict with our parents, I mean, I think that's a big thing also growing up, as a teen or even in our 20s, right? There's just a generation gap, you call it, I mean, whatever it is, right? Whatever those things are. Jainism really helped me to deal with those situations. It helped me, also become a better employee because to be very honest, I was a pretty lazy employee. Um, but as I learned and what I did, part of that was I spent time with sadhus. I kind of see their lifestyle, and we might think, well, like how would their lifestyle really relate to ours as well? But I really saw, the even like the relationship between a guru and their disciples, right? A guru and shishya is similar sometimes to, a boss and his employer employee. Um, the relationship between sadhus together is all can in some ways be, you can learn a lot of things about how to be a good teammate as well. And so when I used to actually go spend time with them, I really found that I was actually learning like team building skills, right? Like communication skills just by watching them. Other ways you can do it is by reading those books. Like I mentioned this Ratna Sundar when I said who's written a lot of books, and all his books are much more practical than they're not very like not very what would you call it, tattva heavy. They're not super technical. They are more about day-to-day relationship advice and things like that. Um, and he really and there's many books, and we're also in the process of translating them into English, into really into like easy to read English as well. Um, and those books also really, gave me just, like mottos that I can use. Um, to how to deal with these things. And so I do honestly feel that, like you said, rituals can come later once we kind of understand, their purpose and how they're done and what should they be done. I think what we should be focusing on in our 20s, in at this age, really is how do I deal with my relationships with people, with situations, with other things in my life, um, in a way that I can stay happy, I can stay satisfied, and I can, have this, this overarching purpose. Because many times I also feel that, we lack a lot of purpose. We don't, if I was to ask someone, why do you do this? I can, if I kept going deeper and deeper, I feel like they would be, we would end up, not having an answer, as to why we do certain things. So I think knowing the purpose behind every single thing that we do, and how it how it fits with the values that we believe in or that we feel are good. Being able to see those connections, I think, was really important. Hopefully that answered your questions.
Yeah, thank you.
I think there was a direct question on my from your talks, characteristics of ownership, accountability, vulnerability, shame, protection have come through very strongly. You have talked about confessions to your group. How did you muster up the courage and find confession, the very shameful passion of watching dirty movies, and that too to your guru? Repentance and resolve appear to have very clearly worked for your salvation. What is the one single indelible mark you'd like to leave with the people listening to your talks? Okay, I will again something else. That is anything when it comes still to the professionalism.
Rishibhai, there is a question from Nick. Nick,
From
do you
Nick,
want to ask this directly, please?
Pranam.
Pranam.
I wanted to know the significance of Bachkan as opposed to doing things out of choice or mind rather than handcuffing myself.
Mukuba, then do you think we're supposed to move on to these general questions then? You're muted.
Pranam, we can. Is there anyone? I know there's a lot of other people in the middle of their professional careers online now, as I can see. So maybe just give them, if any of you, Kayla, Nish, if any of you, any questions, anyone professional related first before we move on to any general questions, and literally it can be as open as anything, just the same way general sort of when is there anyone who wants to ask any question related to the topic first, and then if we've given that 20-30 seconds and no one takes up, then we can maybe move on to general questions. So yeah, maybe we just last chances, 15-20 seconds, anyone at all? If not, I have a question, but let's see if someone else first. Darshna?
Can I ask the question, please?
So there's someone who said they wanted to ask a question. Who's
Hello,
that?
yes, it's Harsha.
Hi. Yeah.
Hi. As a management accountant, we sometimes used to be asked to massage figures to make them look better than they were. And most of the times we used to make reasonable excuses not to massage them so that it doesn't go against my principles of being honesty and so on. But sometimes didn't have a choice but to make it. How do we convince our managers that we shouldn't do this? We should be more honest and so on.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So that was, and that was something that, was mentioning before, right? It's kind of the reason, once if an employee or to some degree kind of tied, right? In some way we kind of handicapped ourselves morally. In the fact that, if we want to have a job, we kind of have to, we have to strike a balance between how much we push back versus how much we accept. It was, that's the reason that, for the most part, most Jains, in our past have been self-sufficient, right? They as very few really as worked under anyone else or anyone else who at least not Jain. It's because so that they don't have to kind of do that. But the world has changed, obviously. Majority of us living outside of India are employees. We work under people. So I'm not sure if there's, a good answer as to, how do you convince someone, because I think it also depends on the dynamics that you have with your managers. Different people have different dynamics. With my manager, it was, it was a pretty, like, almost like a friend kind of dynamic. But we're a tech company, culture is very different, than maybe, different companies. So based on that relationship that you have, with your superiors, I think you have to, how much can you push back versus can you, um, how much risk can you take for they tell you to do something, you don't do it, right? Without
Yeah.
telling them. And as long as they see that there is no problem, see what can happen. Many times we're afraid that if we do something wrong, and then sometimes there'll be blowback, and then but if we feel that let's say we are honest, nothing bad should happen. Even our clients wouldn't be upset. Sometimes we think we have to be dishonest because of some what we're used to, what we've seen in the past. But if we're firm enough, if we really believe that no, if I'm honest, um even the relation, like, it's not gonna harm the relationship with my client or with those others. And if we kind of have to do some sort of maya, what we call it, basically we kind of listen to our manager say yes, and then we don't actually do what they say, do we have that kind of courage? Do we have that kind of do we have that ability to the capacity to take that risk? Because if you are the only breadwinner in your house, and then that you do something like that, that's a different case, right? But if you're not, and it's like, if that means that I do have to get, dinged, or, I have to lose my job, I'm okay. So it really depends on your level of risk, how much risk can you take, what your relationship is with the people who will be affected by those decisions. But at the end of the day, regardless of what that situation is, what decision you make, in our mind at least, we should be, we should always be thinking, that maybe I have to do this for whatever reason it is. I don't have a choice. But that shouldn't mean that we should like it. Like, we can accept having to do that. Acceptance is one thing, but then being attached to that idea that I have to, right, is something is different. Right?
Okay.
So it would mean that the moment that you find an opportunity where you don't have to do it, right, as long as you don't have that, as long as you have, this kind of, like, this hurt, right, this regret in your heart, that when you have those opportunities to not do it, you will also make sure that you won't do it. Does that make sense?
Yep, definitely. Thank you.
Hi, Rishi.
Yes.
So I have a question.
Yep.
So over the years, so personally, over the years, we've, as sort of community leaders in various forms, we see kids growing up, from a young age, to sort of approaching work, approaching teenagehood, starting work, and there's always in my head a balance of how to approach spirituality for myself. Obviously, is always the first thing. They say if there's a fire, protect yourself, protect your family, then your community, your surroundings. And personally, I always feel a responsibility that, as Jains, we've grown up with the most peaceful religion, the most sort of, if we look at the world today and how things are, something that really helps. And there's always this desire that everyone who's born and brought up as a Jain should hopefully, at some stage in their life and in some point, feel that and capture that. And that's always a kind of a passion that's there. And it's as with your own kids, when to let go, when to suggest things, when to so I always have a very sort of, and I think you need to today have a kind of soft approach. But sometimes I let go too much, and sometimes, and kind of trying to have that balance while following your own path. Where how much you follow your own path, how much you do things for, and there's others on this call who are sort of who also have, through an altruistic sense, started up various things, and they're also on their own journeys. And just if you have any answers to the question that, in terms of our professional lives and targeting for those who are approaching a professional stage and delivering our spirituality, which as Janelle said, the third, fourth gen kids are in such a crossover of worlds at the moment, and they're always at a risk, I feel, of losing their spirituality. And once it's lost in a generation, once one or two generations are skipped, it's very difficult to recapture that. And so just from that perspective, and with a few a few potential leaders here on the call for the future as well. If you have any advice for us as a UK, a London community in general, on that area, I'd be really keen to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of things, right? When it comes to, especially when it comes, from the point of leaders, right? And so, just another background. So Jane Alert Group of USA, I was a founding member. We also have we have a similar group in the UK as well. And so we are leaders in our community. I was also, a leader in my own specific sangha as well in Michigan. And so this is something that, that I was taught, or, when I, from my guru, or kind of like by observing, right, is that many times we do feel, that need, to kind of pass on, spirituality, pass on what we learned or what we know to our youth, and kind of, tell them, hey, do this, think about this. But at the same time, if we ourselves, in the process of doing that, are actually hindering our own spiritual progress, or are not actually working on our own spiritual progress at the same time, actually we might feel that we're doing something for the greater good, like, let's say, to have something done, we have to get angry, or we have to fight, or we have to kind of play politics. And then we kind of justify that with, oh, it's for the greater good. But if we're compromising our values, or our, kind of, our spiritual practices in that way, we're actually, doing more of a disservice. And so I'm very always clear with our leaders, and, for Alert, is that if you feel that your own spirituality is taking a hit, right, or is taking the back seat when it comes to all the other work you're doing for like social work or whatever it is, then you need to pause. You need to stop doing that work. You need to, again, focus on yourself, and you need to figure out how can you improve your own self while doing all these things. Because it's not just, things that we do for people, or the things that we say to people that, that affect them. It's also how we ourselves act. It's how we actually interact, how our virtues, manifest themselves in front of people. Those also are very, very, influential. And so that's the first thing I always think, is that we have to make sure that we don't have to be, far ahead. It doesn't, there's not like a level that a certain leader has to be. It's not the level that matters. It's the path that you're taking that matters. So as long as you're on that path, and you making that path the priority, like you said, Mukul, where you all, you do that as well. That is what, makes someone worthy of being a leader, right? Because unless you're walking the path, how can anyone else follow you on that path? And then secondly, right, when it comes to our youth, we're kind of, feeling like there's like this clash of worlds. I personally feel that Jainism, if we think about it the right way, if we go deeper into it, it's not about really, it shouldn't involve, creating a clash. It should really be about building bridges between the two worlds. And so it should be about, I'm living in this world in the UK with so and so issues or problems. How can my spirituality actually make this life better? Right? How can Jainism, the rituals that I do or don't do, or the sutras that I say or don't say, or the daily practices that I do or don't do, or the things that I think about, or the way that I think about them, how does all of that actually improve my life, right? So if I'm a uni student, right, how do I actually, create a better academic life for myself? As a friend, how does Jainism actually make me a better friend, right? How does it help me actually choose my friends? How does it actually help me choose the circle, or the kind? And it doesn't necessarily have to be Jain friends, but how how can I actually, gauge, the quality of my friendships or the quality of my relationships? And if we take it from that perspective, I think that will really, that'll actually be the bridge. Then I feel, youth, and this is because speaking out of my own, my own experience, this is what helped me, that's what brought me over to this side then. Was when I saw the benefits in my normal life, right? In my non-spiritual per se life. We had a raised hand, Mughal?
Thanks. Anyone else connected to the topic, or Darshana Kavit, should we move on to general questions?
We can move on
to
to general questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think you said there was a question. Someone had asked me, Kavit, but I think you mentioned.
So Nick, I think Nick asked you a question about if we can. I'll just reiterate.
Pachkan, I think it was, right?
Yeah, Pachkans, as opposed to doing things out of choice. And mind rather than handcuffing myself. So maybe you can explain a little bit about Pachkan as well in this instance.
Yeah, so I think there's sometimes been a misconception, right? That so the way the question was asked is almost, that we kind of feel that, Pachkan is something that is forced, and then, it's not something that you do out of choice. I think done right, Pachkan, you take Pachkan out of choice. It is a choice, right, to take Pachkan. But now the question is, why, do we have to even do the Pachkan if we kind of, say in our head, right, like this is what I'll do, and then stick to it. There's a lot of reasons, and I think, somebody probably more knowledgeable than me. You should talk to someone. I don't know if my answer will be 100% sufficient, but the way I view it, the way that I viewed, I kind of came to understand Pakistan is really like, we don't ask these kinds of questions, right? When we sign, like with a company, right? When we sign, our legal, what it is, with our company, that, the company will pay us so and so for this amount of time. We expect that, right? We do sign that. Why don't we just trust the company at their word, right? I mean, they're a big company. They want to keep their employees, so wouldn't they just want to pay us what we're expected? And yet we still have to sign. Any other contract, when we have contracts for people who work on our house, right? We don't just pay them the loan, and we do have to sign a contract that they will finish so and so work in so much time. So Pachkan is just this contract, but it's a contract with who? Pachkan is a contract with two people, right? First with Prabhu, and it's a contract with the Guru, right? So Pachkan, right, is not just taken also like kind of in the air. We usually take it in front of, in person if we can, in front of a sadhu or sadhu bhagwan, or in front of a murti, or in front of a photo or something like that. And the reason is, the reason that we have contracts also is that sometimes having a formal contract or formal agreement kind of solidifies those things in our mind. So it's when we take a Pachkan, we're still taking it with our mind, but just to make it solidify, just to keep it, keep a sort of like almost a remembrance, because the physical actions that we do also influence how we think about those things in our minds as well. Just thinking about things, because our mind is very fleeting, and so thoughts can come and go. But if even for that 30 seconds, we are focused and we're saying it, and then we're also, folding your hands or bowing down when you do it, when you kind of combine man, vachan, and kaya, right? Mind, body, and speech all together. And you can, psychology also talks about these things, right? They get more ingrained in our minds, they get more ingrained in our memory. And so it is not really like this divine force or like some sort of like shackles, but it's just for ourselves, right? To keep ourselves accountable, and to keep ourselves, like, to increase our willpower and our ability. And it's the experience of many people that I've talked, even, even my friends who used to kind of have the similar questions. When they do, like, taking Pachkan versus not taking Pachkan, they have seen a big difference, that they are able to actually follow those things, and not break those, Pachkan as quickly or even as much or even at all when they take it, formally as a Pachkan versus just kind of holding it in their mind. Yeah, so somebody I think had directly messaged me as well about kind of how I like confess to the, how did I have the courage to confess to my guru, about things that kind of, the dirty secrets of my life. So and I think it's really hard maybe to like give us, a real solid answer other than the fact that, um I knew who my guru was, and I that connection that I have with them, the trust that was built, because to give our deepest, darkest secrets and tell them, to anyone, right, requires a courage on our side, yes, but it also, the courage comes from that relationship you have with the other person, how much you trust them, how much you trust them to, keep them with themselves, right, to not judge you. And so it was not an immediate thing, I met my guru, and the next year I just confessed. It took me 5 6 years before I came to that point, but because I built that relationship, I built that understanding, and I realized even for the small things that I would go to him for, he was able to help me overcome whatever those small issues were. And so then it helped me build that courage, trying to think of the right word, but that surety that, even if I tell him, the worst parts about myself, about my life, about my decisions, he will not judge me. He will still accept me, right? It will not change how he interacts with me at all. And he will also be the right person to help me overcome those challenges, whatever they are. Um, and when you talk about the question also asked about like what, one mark I want to leave, to people, and is I think that um gurus, and because we live outside of India, it's very hard to sometimes build that connection. But whatever we can, whatever the elders and whatever, Sangh leaders can also work towards helping us create connections with these sadhus, bhagwan, sadhvi bhagwans, with these gurus. I think it it makes a huge difference. Many times it doesn't even require having, be able to speak the same language, just to even see their life, just to see how they interact with each other, how they interact with the world, how they react to situations. Um, can teach you a lot more. Personally, even my guru, I've learned more by watching him than actually speaking to him. Just his life. When I spent, 5 days or 10 days with them, I've learned so much, probably more than I would have learned, by just reading a book for 2 years straight. And so that is, I always would like, encourage you with however possible, in whatever way possible, whenever possible. To at least try to spend that time, to spend some time with some sadhus. And it doesn't have to be about Diksha. The Diksha really is, most sadhus they don't interact with you because they expect you to take Diksha. They interact with you because that's just their nature, right? Is to just be just to be there for others, for whatever they need. So don't, so try to spend as much time as you can. Any other questions, Mukulbai, Darshan?
There was one more question by Ashwin Bhai. Why most Jains loathe to give up milk?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer that question. There are a lot of cultural factors at play there. And there are also a lot of maybe questions of priority when it comes to those things. In the Western world, we kind of also, feel that, and I am also, personally vegan. Um, but we kind of find that to be like a big defining, part of our identity of being Jain. Whereas I don't know if that's true everywhere in the world or in India when it comes to, kind of like, if I'm Jain, then this, my diet is like, or these kinds of things take priority when it comes to those things. Not to say that it should or shouldn't. I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that question. But that's what I've seen. That's what I've noticed in my time.
Rishibhai, I have a question from Hasmukh. On the Tuesday talk, I think you mentioned a book, Panch Sutra. Is it possible to get access to a PDF version?
Yeah, we are working on that. I mentioned it last time, but unfortunately, we're not able to make much progress on actually getting it in PDF version, like uploaded to any platform yet. It is something we do have planned. We just need a little bit of time to get to it, just because I'm traveling also right now. And so my team is kind of following me, and so they also have not had the time yet to get it in, to get it uploaded. But we will do that, and as soon as we do, I will make sure that I will share it with Mukubai or whoever to make sure that it's sent. Everyone can have access to it.
Thank you. I haven't received any other questions.
Someone asked me about my school life. So again, growing up in the US in the 90s and the early 2000s, it was really hard actually many times to kind of accept my identity because I was actually there were not that many, forget Jains, there were just not that many Indians in my school. And so I was bullied also for the early parts of my life quite a bit. Made fun of for my food or for the way, like, obviously going into high school, your clothes and things naturally smell of spices and stuff like that. And so I was made fun of for those things as well. But as I got a little bit older, and this is credit goes to my parents, for being good role models for me and other, elders in the community, is that I actually started taking pride in those things, right? Taking pride in my culture. And so those things didn't bother me anymore. And once, people saw that I did have that pride in who I was and what my background and what my, heritage was, people started accepting that. It was not until until I went to university, to college, that I found a large group of people like me. But by that time, I had kind of overcome those things, and I was able to then, really lean into my identity.
Just one thing I'd like to sort of say to the group is on 6th or 5th to 8th of June, when you're taking Diksha, there's a big part of that which is targeted to a Western audience, an NRI audience, and there's quite a largish group coming from the UK and from the US as well. So just to say that, if anyone wants more details about that, you can get in touch with me. And yeah, just if there's anything you'd like to just mention a few lines about that, Rishibhai.
Yeah, so like Mukubai mentioned, so 6th to 8th in Shapur, which is um a small town about 100 kilometers from Mumbai, is where the Diksha will take place. We are planning because things will also be live, so that outside audiences will also be able to see it if they're not able to come to Diksha. But again, attending a Diksha live, like in person, versus watching online is completely different. That you can't really compare the two. So definitely, I encourage you, and I would, it would be my honor to have you at my Diksha. But a lot of the sessions we do plan on having, if not fully, but to some degree, maybe 50 or 60% even in English, or having some sort of English companion, so that people can understand what's going on. And the messages we want to send are really kind of focused towards um, uh, an NRI group, or somebody who really, when it comes towards youth, the people who are really starting on their spiritual path. Most Dikshas, if you probably have seen any in the past, really um are very different. They just kind of talk about why Diksha and all Diksha, and they're very maybe like just kind of like poetic and heavy in that sort of style, and we aren't. But we're not trying to do that. We're trying to make it so that every single thing that we do is purposeful, and the purpose is really focused on youth and spirituality, and how to start. Nothing advanced at all. Someone asked if I was going to be a vegan after Diksha. Probably yes. So right now I take ghee when needed, but other than that,
There's no other questions on the chat. There's best wishes all going out to you, Rishibhai. Thank you very much for today's session. Mukul bhai, any other questions, Darshna?
No. Jinak na birod kami bolai hoy. If you said anything, michami dugdam. And no, Darsha, do you wanna close?
Yeah, thank you so much, Rishibhai, for today's talk. I think you've inspired a lot of us to think about things that we need to do, changes to make. But thank you for coming and talking to us.
thank you, everyone.
Okay, we should bring this session to an end. Thank you very much for everybody to joining this session. I will just put in the end slides and then we'll close the session. Thank you.